They're all set to go too, so we will get started. We're going to go back to the 21st chapter, pick this up. That's where we left off last week. And let's have a word of prayer to start. Father, we're thankful for this evening and so grateful that we have your word. We are thankful for what it does in our lives, how it acts as an anchor, a rock for our soul. It gives us guidance and encouragement. It gives us a serenity and a strength. And I pray tonight that your Holy Spirit would have an opportunity to speak directly to our hearts about the things that we cover tonight, that we might make that application and strengthen our walk for this week in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're going to begin again verses 22 through 26 and kind of slow down and go through that. So Genesis 21, verses 22 through 26. And there wasn't many names there. They're Abraham and Abimelech, that's it. Oh no, there's Fichel. Yeah, Joe, we'll have you start. Genesis 21, 22 through 26.
22. You're in chapter 21, verses 22 through 26.
At the time, Abimelech and Michael and the commander of his forces said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Well, swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me in the country where you now reside, as a foreigner, the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham said, I swear. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today.
Okay, now, trying to make this application, but in the general order of things, what is happening here is Abimelech, who is king of the Philistines, comes to Abraham and he says, it's obvious I don't understand you guys. You have this strange God. Abraham, you're just a pilgrim. You're not even worried about getting land here. You keep talking about looking for a city that's not made by human hands. I don't understand. But I do know that whatever this deity is that you're worshiping, you're powerful. He's blessed you. And I would just as soon have you stay in our land because you're good for us. But what I don't want you doing is sticking your nose in our business. We're just as religious as you. Funny, huh? Philistines are saying, we're just as religious as you. So you can stay in our land, but don't get involved in our politics. Don't get involved in our morals. Just stick to yourself. And Abraham says, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But one thing bothers me. And Abimelech says, well, what is it? You see this well right here? I dug that. And your people keep taking it away from me. And this well represents a lot more. And I'm not going to try to explain it to you because then I'm talking about my religion, and you don't get that. So just keep your hands off of my well. Chuck, would you read verses 27 through 32?
Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Then Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. Abimelech said to Abraham, "What do these 7 ewe lambs mean, which you have set by themselves?" He said, "You shall take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, so that it may be a witness to me that I dug this well." Therefore he called that place Beersheba, because there the two of them took an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba, and Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, arose and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines for many days.
Oh, 2 verses too many, but that's okay. One of the things that happens is that the world, they either piggyback on our ideas or they come up with some good things once in a while. And church people want to get involved in it. Like a campaign to make sure that everybody in the world has clean water. That's a good thing, isn't it? Or rescuing children from sex trafficking. Or stopping fentanyl coming into our country, or drug abuse. And church people get involved in that, and pretty soon there's a problem. Because church people have a hard time keeping their mouths shut. And that's a good thing. But the problem is, the world, all we want to do is provide clean water to people. Keep your religion out of that. We don't want to hear you talk about Jesus. We're just here to dig wells and provide water. So you're welcome to join us, but don't bring your religion with you. That happens all the time. And your preacher is weird. He's not normal. He's not like most people. I'm not opposed to getting clean water. I'm not opposed to taking medical supplies to people that don't have it. I'm not opposed to sending groups of men and women to hurricane-devastated areas or flood areas. I'm not opposed to that. What I am opposed is going to those places and not being allowed to preach the gospel. If we're not allowed to preach the gospel, I'm not interested in digging one stinking well for clean water. Because they can drink until they're dead and they go to hell. What's up with that? See, what I'm interested in is everything that we do is for the purpose of trying to bring people to Christ. It doesn't always happen. But if we're going to do a food kitchen, I don't know if they have this anymore or not because of the politics. But in the old days, if you wanted to spend the night in a shelter or you wanted to have a free meal, you had to listen to a sermon first. Well, people got real tied up in a knot about that. Why can't you just help these people? What do you got to cram religion down their throat for? Why can't you just give them a place to sleep at night? Why can't you just give them a free meal? Because we're interested in more than just the amenities. We should be interested in their soul. And Abimelech says, you know, we've got a lot of good programs going. And our religions don't line up. We don't like yours. You can stay here, you can help us, but keep your religion to yourself. Abraham says, fine. I don't mind. But I got this one problem. And it's with this stinking well. I got this well, and you guys will not. You keep taking things away from me. And the guy says, whoa, newsflash. First time it's come to my attention. The well here for Abraham. The well for Abraham was like this for us. The book of God. It was a center. It was something that nourished his soul. And there's a problem because the Philistines constantly wanted to take this well away from Abraham. And we come back to this. We come back to this whole thing in our country. Abraham said, I want this well. I dug it. It's mine. I want to keep it. And I don't want it polluted. So stay away from it. Just give it to me. And we're going to see what he does in a minute. Having this book as our well causes all kinds of problems in our world because we have church groups and they try to tell us that the Bible's outdated, that we can't use that book anymore. It no longer means what it says. And so these are churches. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get in so that the world will like them. If we become more like the world will like us. That's always a slippery slope. And the governor of was it the governor of Kansas? Just this past week, they passed a law, and ESPN crucified her. They passed a law in her state that banned biological males from competing against biological girls. And ESPN said, this woman who thinks she's God has the audacity to prevent boys who identify as girls from competing against girls who identify as girls. And the governor, she went right back at him. She said, that's not what I said. I said, we are not going to allow biological males, I don't care how they identify themselves, to compete against girls. It's just not fair. But you see, we're trying to be all-inclusive, and as if everybody should be treated equally, and it ends up not being equal. We've got biological males that are destroying records set by biological girls. How are they ever going to reverse that? Those girls that have spent a lifetime training in a guy that was in a male sport 2 years ago, all of a sudden hops over, and a girl that spent her life training is obliterated. We're just so crazy. And they said, well, what's the answer? The answer is, I have this well. Leave it alone. This is where we're going. This is what we're going by. Okay, now, Abraham says, I'll tell you what we're going to do because we're making this covenant. And as a part of this agreement, because the king says, yeah, you can have the well. And Abraham says, as a part of this agreement, I'm going to give you 7 sheep. And that is going to solidify this oath. So that I own this well. Now, Chuck, read 33 and 34 again, please.
Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines for many days.
We read a little verse like this and we think, what is that? Having secured the ownership at Beersheba, and there isn't much in Beersheba except rocks and sand. And yet Abraham, he plants this tree. It's the only mention in the Bible of Abraham ever planting anything. Remember, he's a Bedouin. He doesn't really farm. But he plants this tree. A tamarisk tree grows only an inch a year, but it takes almost 400 years for it to be full grown. An inch a year, but it will grow for 400 years. That's the tree he plants. Beersheba, as you're looking at Palestine, Israel, Beersheba is right at the bottom edge of where Israel's kingdom is one day going to end. That was the marker for this promised land. That tamarisk tree very well could have been there, almost, well, more than fully grown, when Moses brought the Israelites right through Beersheba. Because they stopped at that well. Isn't that crazy? This tree, God gives Abraham gives God a new name. He calls him El Olam, the everlasting God. And for us, who don't know what 400 years of anything is, he plants this tree that's going to grow over 400 years, and he calls God the everlasting God. And while he's holding, he plants this tree, he's got his boy, his promised son, and he's standing on the promised land. A guy said to his 7-year-old daughter, "Would it be okay if we planted this tree in our neighbor's yard?" She's 7. And she said no. So he was really glad to hear that. So he said, "How about if we plant this tree in our yard?" And she said, "Yes, it's our yard." The significance of planting this tree is because it was Abraham's land. He didn't own it yet, but it was promised to him. And after 400 and some years, it was going to be theirs. God had promised Abraham he'd give his descendants this land. And now he's there. And he's standing in the promised land with his promised son. And he's declaring his allegiance to the everlasting God. So that tree represents God that has blessed him with a child, a peace treaty, and a water supply. And that's the significance of that Abraham planting that tree. Okay. Chapter 22. This was probably Abraham's greatest trial, don't you think? Which one of you are reading? Blondie or Joe? I know it. Which one are you reading? Okay, Joe, you reading? Oh, good. Ready? Chapter 22. And first 3 verses, please.
Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. And God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you."
And 3 and 4.
Early next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance.
Okay, right there. Now, I was just going to say that. Most of the scholars that I like say that about 20 years have elapsed between chapter 21 and 22. That would make Isaac at least 23, 25. Some have him a little bit older. But it's so funny that as we get going, there are commentators that think that Isaac's only 3. And it's really hard to imagine Abraham loading him down with the wood for the altar to carry up a mountain at the age of 3. He'd have been a strong little bugger. Yeah?
It was a story of, it
Yeah?
just before this.
And how old was Isaac?
He looked like a teenager. I was surprised because I thought he'd be younger too. But he also talked to him in the movie, and the boy understood what needed to be done. So he wasn't kicking and screaming like I would do,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
He understood.
That's why most think that he was older.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine, and we don't know, I mean, this is abbreviated, there could have been a lot of things going, but would you think Abraham would have been kicking and screaming? And then notice in verse 2, how does God, and you want to just say throw out the shovel, how does God intensify their relationship? I mean, if you didn't know that Abraham loved his son, look at verse 2. How does the writer his son, his only son, what else?
Whom you love.
Whom you love. Yeah. This is the first mention of love in the Old Testament. First mention of love in the Old Testament.
Did what God asked him to do, but if Isaac understood what was going to happen and why or whatever, it's really, I don't really ever hear much about how he was subservient and did what God asked of his dad to do.
Yeah, there isn't anything other than how God goes through this. It doesn't give us the blow-by-blow account, but what's interesting for us as we read this account is that Isaac is a type of Christ. Isaac is a shadow of Jesus. He's a symbol of Jesus. And that's when we start right at the beginning. In verse 2, what did the writers say about Isaac? You already said it. Your only son. Where have we heard that before? What they call Jesus. The only Son of God. Only begotten Son of God. And then, right after that, in verse 2, what does it say about Abraham and Isaac?
Whom you love.
Whom you love. Do we have any idea how God felt about his only son? I think it said it a couple times, didn't he?
When the dove came down.
Yes. Yes. My son whom I love. All right. So Abraham gets up, and I got to tell you, faith is not faith until obedience is carried out. And one of the things that we see here every January is we talk about faith. Well, you think I talk about money, but I'm talking about faith. And to say, whether you write it on a card or you're just saying it to yourself or you talk to me afterwards, but to say, I am going to tithe, or I'm going to give more going to tithe, or I'm going to continue tithing. We think that's faith, but it's not yet. Because we can talk all we want. I'm going to. And if we never do, only God knows. But it's like, 3 frogs on a log. 2 of them say we're going to jump. How many frogs are left? 3 frogs. Yeah. Saying you're going to jump into 2 different things. Saying you're going to tithe and tithe into the. So for Abraham to get up in the morning, I'm going, means nothing. So what? And I got to tell you, it's never mentioned here, but there's one person that don't you wish you could see what was going on? Sarah. Do you think he told her? I knew that was coming from you. You don't think he told her? I see that. I mean, wow. But if he didn't tell her, worst case scenario, what's going to happen? If he doesn't tell Sarah, what could be the worst outcome of that? Yes, if he comes home by himself. Whoa. Don't come home, Abraham. Just keep on going. You got yourself a donkey? Just keep, that would be awful. But if he did tell her, maybe that's why he got up early in the morning. Oh, this is just such an amazing text. He took 2 of his young men and Isaac, split wood for the offering, and he headed out. On the 3rd day, he saw the place. Just for a second, let's take Isaac out of the picture, because I know he represents Jesus. But let's go back to Abraham. He's at the base of this mountain. And let's go to the Garden of Gethsemane. How does Abraham at the base of this mountain and Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, how does that parallel each other? Absolutely.
Going to do it, so he's going to.
Yeah. And Jesus really didn't want to,
No.
but God told him to, so he did it. You know, it's not as difficult to do something hard if we see a reason for it. Right? I mean, sometimes, we had a nurse back here so she can verify what I'm saying. Sometimes rehabilitation is really hard, isn't it? Have you ever heard of patients that refused to do the therapy because it's so hard? Does that ever turn out good? No. We had a family in Detroit, and when we got there, Their daughter was probably in her late 20s, early 30s. And her hand was always in this position, always. And when we asked what had happened, there had been an accident when she was just a little girl. And they worked on her arm, had it all fixed up. And the doctor said, now it's important that every single day you exercise that arm. Because if you don't, eventually that thing's going to shrivel up and freeze, and it's going to be that way forever. And so Jeannie, bless her heart, never shying away from the tough questions, she says, well, then what happened? And the dad, not the mom, the dad looked at his wife like, come on. You know, were you in prison for 20 years? He looked at his wife and he said this: she would not make her do the exercises because every time we tried, the little girl cried. And rather than put her through that, they didn't. Wow. What is hard is when we can't see the logic, when we don't understand why, when everything seems like this is such a dumb idea, then it's really hard to do it. Can you come up with one logical explanation for taking your son, your only son that you love, up a mountain and killing him? Anybody have an explanation for that? I mean, a real good one? No. How about going to a cross, dying an excruciating death, and you know already millions and millions and millions of people won't even care? Wow. How could that be worthwhile? I am so glad he did it. Oh, I am so glad he did it. But it was a hard decision, and so is Abraham. Okay, so let's start here. Robin, would you read verses 5 through 8?
Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you." Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father!" And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the two of them walked on together.
Now, here we go. This is just so cool. Turn over to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11. Okay? And keep your finger in Genesis 21. 22. 21, they're the same thing in my book right there. Same page. Okay. Yeah, Genesis 22. And Robin, would you read Genesis 22:5 and Hebrews 11, 17 through 19?
22:5.
Yep.
Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you."
Hebrews 11, 17 through 19.
By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, "In all your descendants shall he be called." He considered that God is able to raise his people even from the dead, from which he has also received him back as a type.
What did he tell the servants in verse 5?
We're coming back.
We
We are coming back.
We are coming back. I'm going to go up the mountain, I'm going to kill him, and then we're coming back. Wow. How did he know that? We have no record up to this point that anybody had come back from the dead. None. Ding, ding, ding. I knew there was a reason you were in this room. Oh. Yeah, that's morbid, girl. That is just morbid. The way the commentators say it is, he had this faith in God who had promised him, and he had waited 25 years for the promise. Then he's got this boy, and he went through the heartache of getting rid of Ishmael, and he believed that God had a plan, that even if he killed his son, that God would bring him back. Outside of Jesus going to the cross, never in history has there been an example of someone more perfect obedience than right here. And the trip that they made from the morning they left to the time they got to the base of this mountain, that whole time, Abraham had rehearsed in his mind because he had done lots of sacrifices. And for him, it was a foregone conclusion. Isaac was going to die. But it was Abraham that promised Isaac that God was going to provide a lamb. The land. Yeah. God never lied. You're right. So, look at this promise that he's holding on to. And I don't know that Abraham had any idea what he was saying in verse 8 other than the fact that God will provide. Okay. You ready, Sally? Okay, read verses 9 through 14.
When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided."
And this is where Marla in her commentary earlier, we see this scenario. If he is strong enough to carry this wood up the mountain, and let's say, I mean, some say he's 33, get it? 33. Some say he's 23, 25. And Abraham's about 113. In a wrestling match, who you think's going to win? My money is not on the 113-year-old. I tell you that right now. I just think he's a little too old. So for Abraham to be able to bind him onto the altar, what is that telling us about Isaac? Didn't struggle. Let him do it. Wow. Whew. He just got on top of that wood, and his dad bound him there, stretched out his hand, took the knife, and that was it. God said, hold it. Hold it. Hold it. That's all I needed to see. See, all the way up until that, had Abraham halted, faltered, God would have known. He doesn't believe me. He doesn't trust me. And we would say, yeah, but God, I mean, cut us some slack here. We're talking about father and son. God says, no. When I say that I have to come first, that's what I mean. Okay, back to Isaac and Jesus. Isaac didn't resist. What about Jesus? Didn't resist. Isaac carried the wood. How about Jesus? Carried the cross. He was bound to that wood. Isaac was. How about Jesus? Nailed to the cross. And God never said, okay, that's it. His son died. Abraham's son lived. Wow. Now, do you think, and because they have this rationalization, and of course I guess I'm too much of a sensationalist, they're saying that Abraham was so focused on the altar and getting his son, all bound up, getting the fire going, that he never saw the ram. I know. Great answer. I agree wholeheartedly. Just a point of interest, Dad. What about that over there? I'm just saying. I think, personally, that when he stayed that knife, poof, ram showed up. Because God can call things into existence. Yeah, he didn't need to have them corralled. He didn't need to show up on the mountain early and have them hidden in the bushes. He didn't have to, go through it. Chuck?
Just a consideration, had the ram been there prior to raising the knife? what would it have done to Abraham's faith?
Oh, yeah.
This is a test of faith.
Yeah. And put Abraham in a dilemma. That would have been just as hard. Wait a minute now. I think we could still, God, I think I can still do this. How about if we just use him? No.
Why don't you just make the ram just like run under here when I lower the knife?
Maybe the ram can just leap over the boy as I plunge in the knife, and then we can be done with it. Okay. Oh, Pauline, you're going to kill me, but I'm going to do it anyway. So we're going to skip all those other verses, and we're going to go right down to chapter 22, verse 20, and just have you read down there through 24. What?
Sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah is also a mother. She has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uz, the firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kemal, the father of Aon, Kezed, Hazo, Philadash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. Milcah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor. His concubine, whose name was Rehumah, also had sons, Tabar, Gaham, Tash, and Micaiah.
I think, just a second. Good job. This paragraph, only one significance. And you look through those names, and of course we have Buzz that comes to church here, but it's not the same one. All right? This one's way older in here. What name do you think has any significance, and that's why God had it in the record? Rebekah. Rebekah. She's going to come into play, and she's going to be married to Isaac. So, there we go. Let's go to chapter 23, just because my kids are thinking, yeah, Dad's going to quit now because there's 7 minutes to go, but we're going to go on to chapter 23. And they'll be texting me about it, I know it, but we're doing it anyways. Okay, so, Kim, would you read first 9 verses, chapter 23.
Now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Then Abraham rose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me a burial site among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my lord. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead. So Abraham rose and bowed to the people of the land, the sons of Heth. And he spoke with them, saying, If it is your wish for me to bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and approach Ephron and the son of Zohar for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence for a burial site.
127. The death of Sarah is the only event of a woman's death and burial in the Bible. Pretty important lady. In fact, she is so important that Paul tells us, remember from last week, it doesn't matter about Abraham. God doesn't care who your daddy is. It's who's your mama. And we're children of Sarah. Yeah, not Hagar. You don't want to be a child of Hagar, and we could upset a lot of people if we called them that. Now, Hebron, there in chapter 23, they've got Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron in parentheses, and that's because Hebron was the original name, and when the giants of Anath came in and conquered the inhabitants of Hebron, because it was kind of a mountainous place, they changed the name to Kiriath Arba. The giants did. And then when David conquered the giants, they named it Hebron again. So Hebron was its original name. And that's where Abraham is. And this is the only place, chapter 23, verse 2, this is the only place it tells us that Abraham cried. Didn't cry when God said, "I want you to go kill your son." Didn't cry when he had to send Ishmael away. Didn't cry when he went down to Egypt and said, "She's my sister," and Pharaoh took her. Didn't cry when he went to the land of the Philistines and said, "She's my sister," and they took her. Didn't cry any. When she died, he cried. And he's in her tent. In the way they did that those days, they would have a tent that the body would rest in. And he was in there all by himself. And Isaac was around, but he was in there weeping. And then the inhabitants of Heth are those mysterious people called the Hittites that for centuries archaeologists, scholars said didn't exist. Don't know what Abraham was doing, but they weren't Hittites, and now we know they were Hittites. And he says, "I'm a stranger here. I don't own anything, but I would like to buy this cave to bury Sarah in." You see, he's a stranger, but he wants to buy a cave. What does that tell you that he's thinking about in the future? This land is going to be his someday. It's not now, but I want to buy this cave because someday this is all going to be mine. Because you wouldn't want to bury your wife in a place where you could never go visit her. It's off limits. I mean, that would just be goofy. So he says, I want to buy this. And in verse 6, what's the response of the Hittites? Man, you're richer than our Philistine gods, Abe. You don't have to buy anything. We're just going to give it to you. Now, what do we know about Abraham and gifts? He does. And he gets a lot of them. When the king of Samaria tried to give him gifts, what did he say? I don't want to be indebted to you. Right. So what's he saying here in Yes. I was trying to find that verse. Yeah. Verse 9, yeah. Let me pay full price. Oh, we're done.